Escape. Adapted from the Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Edmond Dantes, the hero of the Count of Monte Cristo, is wrongfully jailed in the fearsome Chateau d'If, the worst prison in France. There he befriends a priest named Faria who has also been imprisoned. The two prisoners plan to escape, but Faria dies unexpectedly. His body is sewn up in a sack and left in the dungeon. Dante sees only one chance of escape. He decides to change place with the dead man. He hides the dead man, crawls into the sack, and sews up the mouth of the sack from the inside. Dantes could hardly move around inside the sack. The more he lay in the same position, the more hot and uncomfortable he became. He placed one hand upon his heart to control its throbbing, and with the other he wiped the perspiration from his temples. From time to time, chills ran through the whole body and clutched his heart in a grasp of ice. The slow hours passed in fear and suspense. At long last he heard footsteps on the stairs to his dungeon. Dantes knew the moment had arrived. He gathered all his courage and breathed as slowly as he could. The footsteps stopped at the door. He guessed that there were at least two men. The door opened and a dim light reached Dante's eyes through the coarse sack that covered him. He dimly saw two shadows put down a bier. The two men approached the bed and took the sack by its extremities. "He is heavy for an old thin man," said one man as he raised the head. "They say that every year adds half a pound to the weight of the bones," said the other, lifting the feet. "Have you tied the knot?" asked the first speaker. "What would be the use of carrying so much more weight?" was the reply. "I can do that when we get there." "You're right, off we go." "What's the knot for?" thought Dantes. The bearers put the supposed corpse on the bier. Dantes stiffened himself in order to play the part of a dead man. Suddenly he felt the fresh and sharp night air. He was used to breathing the stale air of the dungeon, and the fresh breeze brought him both delight and agony. The bearers went on for 20 paces and then stopped. Putting the bier down on the ground, one of them said, "Hold up your torch, or I shall never find what I am looking for." "What can he be looking for?" thought Dantes. An exclamation of satisfaction indicated that the man had found the object of his search. Here it is at last," he said. As he said this, the man came towards Dantes, who heard a heavy substance put down beside him. At the same moment, a cord was fastened around his feet with sudden and painful violence. "Well, have you tied the knot?" the first man inquired. "Yes, and pretty tight too." "I can tell you," was the answer. "Move on then." And the bier was lifted once more and then proceeded. They advanced 50 paces further and then stopped to open a door and then went forward again. Dantes heard the noise of the waves dashing against the rock on which the Chateau d'If was built. With every step, the roar of the sea grew louder. "Bad weather," observed one of the bearers. "Not a pleasant night for a dip in the sea." "Why, yes, the wrist runs a chance of being wet," said the other, and then there was a burst of cruel laughter. Dantes did not understand the joke, but his hair stood on end. "Well, here we are at last," said one of them. They climbed 5 or 6 more steps, and then Dantes felt himself seized by the head and feet and sung in the air. "One," said the bearer, "two, three, and away!" And at the same instant, Dantes felt himself flung in the vast emptiness, flying through the air like a wounded bird, falling and falling with a terror that turned his heart to ice. The fall seemed to last 100 years and then hit the icy water. The terrible cry escaped his lips, but it was lost in the noise of his body hitting the water. Dantes had been flung into the sea, and the heavy stone tied to his feet was dragging him down. The sea was the cemetery of the Chateau d'If. Dantes was stunned, nearly suffocated by the fall. He knew that he could not hold his breath for much longer. His knife was in his right hand, and he quickly cut the sack open, freeing his arms and then his head. But the stone was still pulling him down. He bent his body under the waves and with a supreme effort cut the cord around his leg. He kicked out strongly and rose to the surface. Taking a deep breath, he plunged below the water again, since he did not want the men to see him from above. When he rose a second time, he was 50 paces from where he had first sunk. Above him was a black sky. Before him was a vast expanse of waters whose waves foamed and roared as if before the approach of a storm. Behind him, blacker than the sea, blacker than the sky, rose the giant of granite on which the prison stood. It was necessary to strike out to sea away from Chateau d'If. Dantes knew that the nearest uninhabited island was Tibolion. But how could he find his way in the darkness of the night? At that moment, the lighthouse on the island of Planier threw its beam over the sky. "Ah," he said to himself, "if I swim, keeping the island of Planier a little to my left, I will reach Tibolion." But Tibolion was 3 miles away. The sea was rough and a strong wind slowed him down. When he thought of his incredible escape from the living death of the Chateau d'If, his spirits rose and he found the strength to keep on swimming. He swam for an hour, but there was still no island in sight. "I've swum for more than an hour. If I'm not mistaken, I must be close to Tibolion. But what if I were mistaken?" he thought. A shudder passed over him. Suddenly, the sky seemed to become dark, and the black clouds seemed to come down upon him. At the same time, he felt a sharp pain in his knee. He put out his hand and felt rough rock. It was the island of Tibolion. Dantes rose, advanced a few steps, and with a prayer of gratitude, stretched himself out on the rock, which seemed to him softer than the softest bed he had ever slept in. In a few seconds, in spite of the wind and rain, he fell into the deep, sweet sleep of utter exhaustion. Thank you.